In the studio this afternoon, we have Dr. Bryce Edwards, who is a well-known political scientist. In fact, I've read a lot of his stuff, and I'm sure he's criticised me on too many occasions. But he is in the studio because we want to talk about last night's Newshub poll, the result, and what the implications are, I guess, Bryce, for this government. They won with an overwhelming majority. I think they thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they had this mandate to have quite radical change over this 3 years.
They certainly, thanks, Michael. They certainly had a mandate with 50% of the vote, which is huge under MMP. And of course, this came on the back of the COVID response. It came on the back of congratulations from around the world, from throughout New Zealand, of Jacinda Ardern, slaying COVID. No one could say a bad word about that government. Then that was reflected in the 50% poll. And I think that has been to the detriment of the Labour Party because, once you are given, such a vote of confidence, you lose your head. You get arrogant, complacent. And that's exactly what has happened. Yeah. They have thought that, this will mean a 4-term government. This will mean that, we can't do any wrong.
Yeah.
But they were doing some wrong things prior to COVID, and they were down in the polls. So this really, what we're seeing now is a reversion back to normal, to how things were before that COVID virus.
You're also dealing with what could only be described as an almost supine news media as well. The cheerleading was led by as much of the mainstream media as anybody else leading up into that. And Jacinda Ardern was given almost a saintly status. Yes,
it was quite problematic during the pandemic that the news media, I think they were in some senses reflecting the nation though. In a complicated way, that there was a huge sort of patriotism, nationalism, people wanting to unite, and that's what emergencies like this do. Wherever they occur, people come together. I don't think the media should be part of that myself. They should stay more objective.
Well, they've been paid to be part of it. So.
Well, whether they've been paid or not is another issue, and we could discuss the essentially the subsidies by the state for the media. But I just think the media went along with the mood.
They certainly did.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the poll last night would suggest that the correction is underway, but like the housing market, really. They are behind, I think, only a couple of points. What is it, 40-38 or something like that? Or 38-36, I can't remember.
Look, I mean, with these polls, a lot of commentators get, too much concerned with the actual detail, who's 0.5% ahead of each other. Yeah. It doesn't really matter that much. What we know is that Labour's gone down.
That's right.
They've dropped 6 percentage points. National's up many percentage points. They're about even. I mean, we've had 3 polls in a row now that show National ahead of Labour, but not by much.
That's right.
Basically, they're kind of even Stevens for the next election. And the minor parties, they're also just bouncing around a bit. But we shouldn't get too concerned about. It's within the margin of error, these differences.
Agreed. So, but what we're looking really at, aren't we, Bryce, is that we're looking at an election. So the next election is going to be to the wire. And from now until the election, anything that either National or Labour do is going to have an influence upon that final result. Yeah,
and it will bounce around. And in the end, yes, some of the minor parties might be significant in the outcome because you've got a left and a right bloc.
Yeah.
The major parties with their flank parties to the left and right, Greens and ACT, and then of course the wild card of the Murray Party and what happens with that, and the wild party. I'm calling your former party, New Zealand First, the wild party. The wild card, what happens with them, whether they make some sort of comeback.
Yeah, that would be Lazarus-like, you'd have to say.
Well, there's a big mood for some sort of party that really goes for the cost of living issues, that takes up some of the fight against some of the more socially, or social engineering, you might even see it as, cultural politics.
Isn't that the ACT Party, though? Isn't it the role that they're playing pretty well? To some extent,
yes, I think so. But, and they rose, to about 18% in some recent polls. They're back down to 6%. And, I don't know, it's a bit of an uneasy fit, I think, for the ACT Party to be both economically quite to the right, but then taking on a lot of these sort of culture war issues.
I'm also interested, though, that the National Party seemed to have got its leadership right, and really everybody was waiting, surely, for that to occur.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure they've got their leadership right. They've got their optimal scenario from what talent they have, and it's a pretty bland one, and that's sometimes all you need in politics.
Well, I was just going to say, for God's sake, I came in under Jim Bolger. Now you can't get more bland than that. So bland does work, as long as you don't scare the horses.
Yeah, and so I don't think we're seeing any huge enthusiasm for National in these recent polls. What we're seeing is a soft vote, shifting away from Labour in the way that it always was going to, angry, and it's kind of vote that's not necessarily a centrist vote. It's kind of just all sorts of people that are struggling at the moment, especially with the cost of living, looking around for an alternative. Chris Luxon, he seems okay. Let's not tell pollsters that we'll vote for him. I don't think there's a huge sort of we had Jacinda mania. I don't think there's any Luxon mania at the moment.
No, I think that's true, but I'm struggling to remember the last time we had an opposition leader polling where Luxon is now.
That's right, and so I think that's a factor of just how unpopular this government is, that you can get a rather bland, politician like Luxon, who's not really saying a lot. He's not really even differentiating himself in terms of policies with this current government. But he's a relatively safe peer. I mean, he has dropped the ball in the last couple of weeks a bit, but that voters don't care about those things.
No, they don't. You're right. Wellington does, but the rest of New Zealand does not.
Yeah.
Now, Three Waters. Now, because we were talking just off air before this interview about whether or not this government continues with some of the policies, particularly in the environmental areas, and Three Waters in particular, that is causing such significant upset in provincial New Zealand in particular. We just got the announcement by Nanaia Mahuta that basically, we're carrying on, and drew a line under it and said, off we go. Is there a time at which this government, looking at these polls, goes, we carry on down that route and we're going to do ourselves incalculable harm?
This is absolutely the case, and I don't know how much the media, politicians know, I suspect the politicians do, just how unpopular Three Waters is and how unconvinced the public are about this, especially the co-governance element of it. And the government haven't been able to sell that, and it's a bit of a dog, really. And so and it is, I think, having an impact on these polls. So the poll we saw last night, we're seeing people rebelling against Labour or shifting away from Labour because of cost of living issues, and they see this government as being focused not enough on economics and more on some of these other, maybe you'd call them cultural issues, I don't know, where another agenda that voters perceive this government being more interested in.
Well, we're just also talking about Helen Clark, and the difference being that when she struck the big cultural issue of the seabed and foreshore, she went the very pragmatic line and heaved the Labour government back into what very much the middle ground and got rid of Tariana Turia. And
essentially, and Clark and Ardern are very pragmatic politicians. She's not the far lefty that many people make out. She's entirely driven by polls and focus groups as well. But of course, what explains things like Three Waters and some of the other more contentious agendas in this government is the need to satisfy different groups of support for this government. Part of it is the Murray Caucus, for example.
Well, and that's the next question, because if let's just say that the poll result was replicated in reality at the next election, and the balance of power did end up with the Maori Party, isn't the Maori Party a real danger to Labour at the next election?
I think they're more of a danger in the lead up to the election, because voters, get quite antsy about coalition partners, and a lot of scrutiny starts coming on.
So you see it working the other way?
Yes, absolutely. No, the Murray Party is going to be a nightmare for Labour in the weeks, months leading up to the election. There's going to be so much focus on what is the Murray Party going to demand from Labour in a coalition. Yeah. And yes, the Murray Party is popular amongst a certain sort of liberal group, socially liberal group. In fact, a lot of Pākehā, especially in this place, Wellington. But I don't know, they're going to be repelling a lot of voters as well. Yeah. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Good minor parties should have a lot of love and hate. The best ones do. I think it's when they infect other parties is the problem.
I think it's a very good point you've raised, though, because I can remember writing Winston Pete's speeches in '96, and the way we scared people into New Zealand First was to point to ACT.
Yeah.
and say, if you elect National, they'll be there.
Yeah.
You don't want Prebble and all those weirdos.
That's right.
So you're absolutely right. I think if you're the Nats, yeah,
They
it's a
should
pretty
not
easy
be scared by the Murray Party doing well. It's playing into their hands,
absolutely.
if anything.
All right. The other thing I want to talk to you about, though, is Trevor Mallard.
Okay, yeah.
Now, I have to say, I've seen megalomania and I've seen petty megalomania, but the latter seems to have been covered completely by Mallard. I thought his actions during the protest were just weird and only just served to galvanise that crowd. But now he is deciding that he's going to trespass former MPs who basically just turned up and said something, like Winston Peters, 2 years in limbo. What's happening here and why?
Look, in commenting on politics, I really try to be objective. I try to be neutral. I don't, mix with the politicians just so that I can, have some sense of objectivity if I can. But of course we can't always. But I have real trouble being objective about Trevor Mallard because I do think he's one of the more nastier politicians around. He is a bully. He's, he's driven by, I think, some motives that aren't that honourable. And so I think he's, there's been a lot of bad speakers in recent parliamentary history. Wow. So, it's not that I really want to compare him to other ones because anyhow, the point is, I think he's the worst speaker in living memory. The Prime Minister's cutting him adrift a bit, though. She is, and that was interesting. So yesterday we saw Mallard come out with these trespass orders against Winston Peters. I immediately assumed that this must be something that's been well worked out behind the scenes. No, you wouldn't just have the Speaker come out and do such a big thing on his own bat. He did. That was obvious because the Prime Minister's reaction at first looked a bit stunned. She didn't comment. She came out later and she gave him quite a whack, saying that he had to go back and talk to the other parties in Parliament and work out the procedures for giving trespass orders, especially to former politicians. So that was quite a slap in the face for Mallard. She doesn't normally do that.
Well, I actually thought that the person who most have loved it, most of all, of course, is Winston Peters.
Of course.
My God, free publicity and you're back on the front page.
Nothing better than being persecuted when you're trying to get back into power, making a comeback.
That's right.
And he is being persecuted, so he's not even having to make it up. This is quite outrageous.
So he got 2 years, didn't he? And Matt King, the former MP for Northland, got 1, is that right?
Yeah, I can't remember.
Well, I think it is. But the thing that struck me from that, Bryce, was that there you were, sitting there, you're one of the leaders of the occupation, you only get half what Winston Peters does, and he just wandered amongst the crowd and made a desultory speech.
Well, we're not really seeing any consistency from the Speaker, and we're not seeing any transparency about how these decisions are made, and we don't know who's next to get the trespass orders. Right. There's been plenty of other people, including myself, that were on the grounds there.
I was waiting for Sean Plunkett to get trespassed.
Absolutely.
Broadcast live, and why wouldn't he be?
And maybe there's a distinction being made here that the likes of Matt King was part of the protest. Winston Peters was arguably supporting the protest, and I think that's arguable. But there's
supporting the right to protest, I think.
Well, there was an element of him encouraging the protests.
Well, wherever there's a crowd, there's Winston.
Yeah. Look, I'm not making this case. I'm just saying it could be a case that could be made by the Speaker, but we haven't seen that case.
No.
Whereas, Sean Plunkett going along, I don't believe he was one of the people holding up the placards waving. He was there like others to observe and try and work out what the hell was going on.
I do want to talk about that protest in one sense, though, is that as somebody who's triple vaxxed and is a firm believer in vaccination programs and things like that, and
likewise.
Scientific empiricism is pretty bloody obvious. I felt uncomfortable watching so many people alienated and pushed away from us. And I think that protest was, in a funny sort of way, quite useful in terms of the opposition in this country by giving people like me and you a view that you've gone too far. You've taken jobs away from people that they didn't need it. And for example, in my area of work, which is the wineries in central Otago, lots of people lost their jobs, and yet they were no risk to anybody.
It was a wake-up call, and I was certainly shocked by the size of that protest and everything that happened at the protest, to be honest. And then I was quite shocked to see opinion polling showing how many New Zealanders were sympathetic to them. And so,
for the reasons I think
it was useful for that. But so what we're seeing really is, just everything else that's playing out globally, whether it's the recent presidential election with Marine Le Pen getting 41% of the vote, Brexit, and the majority, a very big referendum, and the majority voted to leave the EU, the vote for Trump. These are all some similar forces being mobilised around the world that are angry with the status quo, and a lot of these people are those at the bottom of the heap. These aren't business people so much. These are ordinary working people who are, suffering in lots of ways. And so, I don't happen to agree with those protesters, but I wanted to take them seriously and understand where they were coming from, because although some of their messages were quite crazy, some of them weren't. And although, I wasn't, those messages didn't resonate with me, I could see that they spoke for something bigger that was happening in society.
Yeah, I want to talk about
me.
Be aware of. But the interesting thing again is, as sort of an external observer, was that again there seemed to be a number in the mainstream media who regarded the protesters as crazy and dismissed them instantly.
And that's one of the problems we have in New Zealand politics and media and public life, is the dismissal of the people at the bottom and the people that don't kind of conform to what the new consensus is, which is quite a narrow consensus in New Zealand society about us all being, having the same view on economics, social issues, and it's beyond the pale to disagree on those things.
Now, one final question, and I don't, again, it's from observing people that I know and respect, but the Ukraine invasion and war seems to have altered consciousness, not just in Europe, but around the world and here as well. I mean, it can't not, but when you look at the dreadful images on television screens every night, is that going to be a factor in the election? And I don't mean in the sense of, one party or the other being favoured or unfavoured by it, but just in the sense of changing mood and people feeling more insecure. And I guess it's certainly going to affect things like inflation and supply chains and things like that. What's your thoughts?
Well, it's yet to be seen. It's a bit too early, and we don't know how far this is going to develop. But certainly, wars do have that impact of uncertainty, and especially if it is impacting on the cost of living, and it is to some extent. I think it's overplayed by a lot of politicians, but it is feeding into that. But it also feeds into, it's another version of nationalism that does have an impact and can sometimes help the incumbents. So, for example, if New Zealand does end up sending troops that are a bit more involved in the current ones, that also could, going to war is a powerful tool of politicians when they want to look strong, they want to be playing the card that they're doing something valuable for the world.
Well, former Defence Minister Ron Marks suggested sending essentially the SAS over there.
Yeah.
That would be fairly extreme involvement. I mean, essentially...
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite alarmed that Ron Marks' sort of view is increasingly popular, I think.
Yeah, no, listen, but I mean...
We need to have a debate about it. I mean...
we did send the SAS to Afghanistan.
Exactly.
They fought people, they killed people, they were killed.
That's right. So I think the main thing is we have debate about these issues, it not just be the decision of government to just do it unilaterally, and we need in the media to be looking at the different options and understand what's happening in Ukraine and Russia and NATO. I'm not sure we're getting that at the moment.
Okay, all right. Bryce, thanks very much. Now,
Cheers,
you're
Michael.
also involved, very quickly, I just want you to give me a sort of potted summary of something called the Democracy Project that you're involved in at Victoria University.
Democracy Project, it's just a it's a vehicle at the university that is supposed to kind of foster debate and information about New Zealand politics and society. We have a website, democracyproject.nz. We put up articles. Some of them are used by the platform, in fact. All the things we put up are available for republishing, and the platform seems to like some of this, so it's good.
Forgive me for saying this, but when university academics require themselves, get involved in setting up the Democracy Project, I think there is a suggestion that there's a need for it. In other words, there's something wrong. Is that what motivated you to set this up?
Yeah, that's a part of it. I think we have a very hollow democracy in this country, a very superficial one. We need more debate. We need more differences and diversity of opinion, and we need to battle those things out. We're not very good at that in this country.
Well, what about the cancel culture at places like Victoria University? We've seen that the universities throughout the Western world have essentially been at the forefront of deplatforming speakers and ideas and concepts.
It's a very sensitive topic on campus, and I'm in favour of maximum speech, and that's a bit of an unpopular stance on campus for many. And we do need to take a lot of things seriously, like racism, sexism, all the rest, and we need to be having debates about those. The problem is when it's closed down and you can't debate those things.
Yep.
And so I think there's a lot of people on campus that actually do want those debates, but there's a bit of a chilling atmosphere at the moment.
Good on you. Well, we'll see lots more of you, I hope, on the platform. It's nice to talk to you.
You too.
Bryce Edwards from Victoria University. Go to the Democracy Project, have a look, see what you think. Okay, bye.